My name is Sarah Frances Shaw Graves, or Aunt Sally, as everybody calls me. Yas'm, that's a lot of name, and I come by it like this. My husband was owned by a man named Graves, and I was owned by a man named Shaw. So when we was freed, we took the surnames of our masters. I was born March 23rd, 1850, in Kentucky, somewhere near Louisville. I'm going on 88 years old now. I was brought to Missouri when I was 6 months old, along with my mammy, with that man named Shaw. He owned her, but he allotted her to a man named Jimmy Graves, who come to Missouri to live with his daughter, Emily Graves Crowders. I always lived with Emily Crowders. The matter of allotment was confusing to the interviewer, and Aunt Sally endeavored to explain. Yas'm, allotted. Yas'm, I'm going to explain that. You see, there was slave traders in those days, just like you got horse and mule and auto traders now. They bought and sold slaves and hired them out. Yes'm, rented them out. Allotted means something like hired out. But the slave never got no wages. That all went to the master. The man they was allotted to paid the master. I never was sold. My mammy was sold only once, but she was hired out many times. Yes'm, when a slave was allotted, somebody made a down payment and gave a mortgage for the rest, a chattel mortgage. Yes, a down payment. Times don't change, just the merchandise. Allotments made a lot of grief for the slaves. We left my pappy in Kentucky 'cause he was allotted to another man. My pappy never knew where my mama was, and my mammy never knew where pappy was. Aunt Sally paused a moment, then went on bitterly. They never wanted mama to know, 'cause they knew she'd never marry so long as she knew where he was. Our master wanted her to marry again and raise more children to be slaves. They never wanted mama to know where pappy was, and she never did. Mammy said she would never marry again to have children. So she married my stepfather, Traddle Barber, 'cause he was sick and could never be a father. He was so sick he couldn't work. So me and Mammy had to work hard. We lived in a kitchen, a room in a log house, joined on to the master's house. My Mammy worked in the field, even when I was a little baby. She would lay me down on a pallet near the fence while she plowed the corn or worked in the field. Stepfather and Mammy often tended their own tobacco and grain in the moonlight. This they could sell and have the money. We could go to church, which was held in the schoolhouse. Sometimes they let us play with the other children after the noon dishes were washed and there wasn't anything else to do. There was most always something to do. Master never allowed nobody to be idle. Mammy worked in the house and in the fields too. At night, after she come home from the field, she had to grate corn for the family next day. We didn't have many grist mills them days, and we would punch holes in a piece of tin and rub the ear corn crust and make meal for our use. Nowadays, when you all want a nice wool dress, all you got to do is go to the store and get it. When I was growing up, and wanted a nice wool dress, we would shear the sheep, wash the wool, card it, spin it, and weave it. If we wanted it striped, we used two threads. We would color one by using herbs and bark. Sometimes we had it carded at a mill, and sometimes we carded it ourselves. But when we did it, the threads were short, which caused us to have to tie the thread together, making too many knots in the dress. I've gathered the wool off the fences where it was cut off the sheep and washed it and used it to make mittens. Yes'm, I worked in the fields, and I worked hard too. Planting and harvesting in those days was really work. They used oxen to break up the ground for corn and for plowing it too. They hoed the corn with a hoe and cut the stalks with a hoe and shooked it. They cut the grain with the cradle and bound it with their hands and shucked it. They threshed the grain with a hickory stick, beat it out. I carried water for the field hands. I've carried 3 big buckets of water from one field to another, from one place to another, one in each hand and one balanced on my head. Yes'm, some masters were good and some was bad. My mammy's master whipped his slaves for pastime. My master was not so bad as some was today slaves. I've had many a whooping. Some I deserved, and some I got for being blamed for doing things the master's children did. My master whipped his slaves with a cat o' 9 tails. He'd say to me, "You ain't had a currying down for some time. Come here." When he whipped me with that cat, the cat was made of 9 strips of leather fastened on to the end of a whip. Lots of times when he hit me, the cat left 9 stripes of blood on my back. Yes, ma'am. Aunt Sally brooded over the whipping memories, then, under the influence of a brighter thought, continued. I belong to the African Methodist Episcopal Church, and I ain't never cussed but once in my life. And that was one time I nearly got 2 whippings for something I didn't do. Some of Master's kinfolks had a wedding, and we walked to the church, and somebody kicked dust on the bride's clothes, and I got blamed, but I ain't never kicked it. The master's daughter, Puss, she kicked it. Old mistress, she whipped me. Yes'm, she whooped me. It was the worst whooping I ever got. The worst whooping in my whole life, and I still got the marks on my body. Yes'm, I got 'em yet. When the master come home, he was going to whip me again, and I got mad and told him it was a lie. And if Puss said I kicked dust on the white folks, she was a damned lying devil. He took the switch and gave Puss a whipping for telling a lie. Yes'm, that's the only time I ever cussed in my life. Yes'm, and that's about all I knows about slavery and folks' ways hereabouts. I can tell you about after we was freed. When we was freed, all the money my mama had was 50 cents. I never went to school till after I was freed. I went 2 winters and a little more to school near Burlington Junction. I never went a full term because I had to work. I knowed my husband all my life. He was brought here by that same man, Jimmy Graves, that Mammy was allotted to. My husband took that name. His full name is Joseph H. Graves. We had one child, a boy. His name is Arza Alexander Graves. He lives here with me. It's our farm. I have lived on this place ever since I married. That was in the same year that Burlington Junction was started. We first bought 40 acres for $10. Then 2 years later, we bought the back 80 acres for 15. Things has changed. We working for ourselves now, and what we get is ours, and no more whippings. I worked in the fields and helped pay for this land. I belong to the African Methodist Episcopal Church in Maryville.